The aerial photos were as sunny as day-brown goo, running straight into the lake past the no trespassing sign, which I had installed myself. Karen, the HOA president, was standing beside a backhoe like she was dedicating a monument cut to me on the opposite side of the lake phone. In one hand, binoculars in the other. Already calling my lawyer. Yep, that's me. We ask ourselves, how did it come to this? That the HOA is drinking sewage through their own water system and trying to sue me for it. It started with the odor, not the earthy, fishy lake smell that I was used to after 10 years of living on the water. No, this was a sour, pungent odor. Sort of like someone left diapers on the sun and then tried to cover it up with air freshener. I first noticed it on a Tuesday morning, having my normal coffee out on the patio, watching ducks making lazy ripples in the lake. The water was also blacker than usual. Too greasy, I remember, because it reminded me of motor oil in a puddle floating from a rainstorm. I had thought maybe someone upstream had spilled something by accident. Maybe the construction a mile north. But on Thursday the ducks were missing, and the algae that usually come in late July had exploded overnight, giant mats of them, greenish-gray and stringy, blanketing the surface like mossy pancakes. I was not a scientist, but I knew something was amiss. And I'm not the kind of person who's going to sit around waiting for someone else to do the hard asking. So I equipped my kayak, a cooler full of ice, and some mason jars. Spent most of that Saturday paddling around, looking like some hillbilly EPA agent, collecting water samples and storing them along with my CORs, where the smell was most potent in the direction of the Southeast Cove, located behind the maintenance facility near the HOA's stormwater discharge. That's where I found it, a large piece of plastic, such as a fire hose, half buried in cattails and spewing brown liquid directly into the lake. No warning, no filtering, just a crud-cold hose, dumping. God knows what in the water. I swam in over the summer, I snapped, then videoed. Then I called the county. The woman at Environmental Services said she'd open a case, but the way her voice sounded flat told me she'd not be losing sleep over it. I wasn't surprised here around the HOA is accorded more weight than the mayor, and Karen, our board president, makes it her own personal fiefdom. You kiss the ring, or you're exiled. I chose to do neither and bring the proof to the source. Monday afternoon, I went into the HOA office with a manila folder held under the bend of my arm and 3 water jars in the other. Karen sat behind her desk like a deposed queen, wrinkled linen blouse, pearl earrings, and pursed-lipped smile that told me she'd already decided that she didn't like me today. Mr. Franklin, she said, clasping her hands as though she was going to give me a lesson on planning money. I suppose you're here about the algae. I opened the folder and shoved a glossy picture on her desk, close-up of the hose that isn't algae, Karen. That's untreated sewerage from the rear of your maintenance facility. Her smile did not falter. Do you have proof that it's sewerage? I set one of the mason jars on the floor. How about you smell that and get back to me on what you believe? She did not. Instead, she pushed the photo back over to me like a blackjack dealer folding a busted hand. Mr. Franklin, your house is on the lake. How do we know that contamination isn't from your septic system? I blinked because I don't have a functioning septic tank. Since the 90s, you people replaced the neighborhood with a community system. 20 years ago, remember? That large infrastructure project you voted for? Well, she said with a sudden poke of her pen from our previous visit, there's water pooling around your outbuilding. Perhaps runoff. Perhaps illegal graywater dumping. That was the moment I knew the meeting wasn't a meeting. It was a trap. She'd already had a notice of violation printed out in a folder in back of her, pushed it across the desk like a gift. I opened it. $1,200 fine for contaminated runoff, lake pollution, and property mismanagement. Owing in 30 days, or penalties would escalate. I laughed. Couldn't help but you're catching me for the sewage. You're pumping into my lake. It's not your lake, she said. Smug and matter of fact, it's the HOA's lake community, kept up community governed, that did it. I stood, took a hold of the violation, and folded it in two. You just accused me of it, Karen. I'd told her, packing it in the back of my pocket, a doozy. She grinned again, all lipstick and vinegar. See you at the next board meeting. Word got around faster than I'd anticipated by Friday neighbors who used to wave. No longer looked at me, no longer hello. My Amazon shipments were coming dented. The local newspaper carried a not-so-covert op-ed about irresponsible lakefront homeowners and standards of responsible environmentalism. Someone even dumped a bag of dog poop in my mailbox twice. I'd spent long enough at the lake to know the giveaways Karen had declared war, and now she was playing for keeps, like a two-bit sheriff in a Western. But here's the thing, she didn't know what section. Nobody really did, not even. Most of the board 30 years prior to my grandfather's drilling the well, which serviced the entire HOA at the time, prior to half of the subdivision even being built. It was a dry lot with a single cabin and a retired hydrologist, with a dream to live off the grid, that hydrologist none other than my grandfather. And he wasn't insane, he was a detail man. When the property started developing in the early 2000s, he signed a private deal with the developers, whereby they would access his well in exchange for monthly maintenance charges and a stipulation that kept ownership of the water supply. To him, his heirs, or whoever he sold it to when he died. I inherited the property and the well. The HOA had long forgotten the pipes are underground. The check they send each month auto-deposits into my LLC, but I never did rescind the agreement, and I never did give up the rights. I spent the remainder of the week digging through my grandfather's older file cabinets, the ones made of metal with drawers that weigh more than a minivan. And there it was the original agreement for water rights. Signed, notarized, and kept safe, along with a county-certified map of the water distribution pipes. I cross-checked it with the HOA's public utility accounts. Certainly the entire subdivision along the clubhouse, the pool, the sprinklers for the parks, and each and every home tapped into water. Tapped from my well. I was no longer a homeowner. Now I was their landlord, their supplier, their lifeline. Karen believed she might bully me into submission, but she had no idea that with every time that she flushed out her HOA office toilet, she was draining my water dry. And, well, now that she tried to delegitimize me as a pollster while they were dumping raw sewage into a lake in a residential community. Well, I had some contingencies beginning with the next HOA board meeting. But before that, I had to open some valves. Let's just say that things were going to get dry, extremely dry. The contract was so ancient that it even had fax numbers and not emails. No QR codes, fax numbers. A legal, absolute time capsule of words typed on yellowing paper that had not seen the light of day in at least a decade. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my tool shed, surrounded by folders and rolled-up blueprints, the smell of old wood and mildew in my nose, and my grandfather's name in crisp fountain pen on each and every page. The document carried water access and supply license agreement date, April 1989, signed by a gentleman named Edna with a flower stamp. And it made one thing absolutely certain. The well and the water it provided were private property ours. The developer, then a gentleman named Hank Durbin, had signed a mutual access agreement on the condition that ownership of the well never moved away from my family, and HOA would continue to pay a meager monthly rent to access water. But here's the catch. The agreement never terminated. No renewal clause and no clause to grant the HOA any easement rights at all beyond passive access. My great-uncle, God rest, his paranoid soul had ceded the right so far down in legalese. You'd think he'd been reduced to ashes in a past life by an HO. President, I laughed out loud, sitting there on the ground. Because while Karen and her clipboard mafia were too busy writing me up for made-up runoff violations, they were literally watering their whole empire with my inherited water. That laugh didn't last long, because I recalled the sludge the pipe. The lake, if they were being this careless with what they were pumping into the system. What else were they putting in the environment? My environment. So I phoned up an old acquaintance from a short stint at a water quality consulting company, a guy named Doug, who I owed a favor after helping him out of a pretty sordid one involving an excavator and a bottle of Jack Daniels. How soon can you arrive? I asked. To do the entire panel lead copper coliforms, the whole lot. I can be there tomorrow, he replied. But if I do discover something, you going to make some noise, no? I replied, Not at first. I'm going in order to keep it under wraps. He came with his gear, looking like someone who has 6 flannel shirts and a freezer full of venison. We had 4 lines feed, 1 from the well, itself 1 off my faucet, and 2 off random hydrants on the HOA lots. The test results came back worse than I'd hoped. My line was clean, thank God. But hydrants through the roof with fecal coliforms, phosphates, and chemical residues, I couldn't even pronounce without choking. Karen and her employees weren't just polluting. The lake, they were backflowing sewage into the same pipe that would be utilized for drinking water, which meant not just were they killing the environment, they were violating Health Code's contract. And best of all, giving me every legal grounds to terminate their access without notice. And that's exactly what I did. No press release, no HOA notice, just a wrench turnaround in the concrete pit at the rear of my garage. I shut off the supply, locked the valve, and chained the well hatch closed for good measure. Then I went inside, made some popcorn, and observed the fallout like a slow motion. Fireworks display. It started with phone calls. Dozens of them. Then an emergency email alert. Temporary loss of water because of maintenance by morning. Water pressure had dropped all the way throughout the whole development. Karen's pretty fountain at the HOA clubhouse stopped burbling. Sprinklers wouldn't turn on toilets, flushed with a doleful gurgle that sounded like defeat. Then the tankers of bottled water, one after another, lined up in line like an army before a siege paid for by the HOA Emergency Contingency Fund, which I just so happened to know was already overdrawn from the last landscaping fiasco. Residents couldn't help but question, not just the blackout, why we never had a backup system, why nobody was notified of a shutdown, why they were being charged $900 a month in fees and still had to drag in bottled water. Like disaster victims, Karen freaked out. I could smell it in the air, fear and desperation mixed with whatever she sprayed in her hair. Every morning, she held a special board meeting at the community center that HOA members only attended signs written all over it, like some state secret. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be, because halfway through the meeting, a neighbor named Paul texted me a photo of the agenda item 3 discussion of legal action being taken against well operator. I nearly spilled my beer. Legal action being taken against me for turning off my own water supply after I contaminated it. I took a deep breath the next morning. A certified letter came by courier with full HOA letterhead and overbearing serif font that was attempting too hard to appear official. They were blaming me of willful destruction of critical infrastructure, willful placing of citizens in harm's way, and taking advantage of public trust. They made me reopen flow within the hour, submit to third-party audits, and sign a new operating agreement written entirely by their attorneys, pro bono. I read it first, twice, and then I laughed so hard that I almost aspirated my sandwich. These people did not have the slightest idea of what they were doing. You cannot sue someone for not providing you with something that they possess, especially after you violated the use agreement with toxic backflow and illegal dumping. They were handling this like it was a playground slap fight. But I had decades of records test results. And most importantly, a contract so impenetrable that it may as well have been laminated in Kevlar. So I gave my lawyer an old family friend named Luann, who'd built a reputation taking apart HOA limb from limb in land rights cases. I'm faxing you something I said, and then I want you to bury these people in paper. I live for this. She wrote the cease and desist, landed on Karen's desk 48 hours later with a certified complaint of environmental wrongdoing, formal revocation of access to water supply, as in Section 8.4 of the first agreement, and a notarized receipt for the cost of contamination testing, repairs and legal fees amounting $1,147,805.62 payable in 30 days. Karen blinked, and for the first time in her too-scripted life, she didn't have a script, but she did not go quietly into the night 1 week later. I was served this time. They were suing me in court, suing for damages loss of community access, and acquire this emotional anguish. Charged I'd water service to avenge for unrelated brawls. Their lawyer, some self-satisfied corporate gopher with a 300 suit, appeared at the initial hearing with a binder as thick as the Bible and tried to portray me as some crazed hermit with a vendetta against the rules Mr. Franklin he held. With that kind of smug condescension, you only encounter in those who believe lawn stripes are a point of honor imperative. Do you believe that you are above the law of the community? No, I said, but I believe I am above the level of sewage. The courtroom erupted into laughter. The judge raised an eyebrow. Then I pulled out my Packet Water Lab test results drone photos of the dumping contract quotes and a notarized affidavit of dug-on levels. The judge read it slowly and then asked the HOA attorney, "Why the 7 most beautiful words in the English language? You did not say anything about it." The trial lasted less than a week. The HOA case disintegrated like soggy drywall. Karen tried to blame her maintenance staff. The maintenance man confessed he was doing exactly as he had been instructed at the end of it. The judge did make a decision in my favor, found the HOA to be in contractual default, ordered them to pay me for diminution of property values and stress, and gave them a court injunction to stop further use of my well without having a completely renegotiated contract. One written on my terms, bottled water trucks were the norm. The community pool was drained until notice. Karen's newsletters became smug and then shrill, and then stopped coming altogether. I didn't utter a word. I didn't need to. I just erected a new sign next to the wellhead. In bold blue letters, "Private supply trespassers will be." I added a second line in smaller script. "Hydration is a privilege, not a right." I countersued on a Monday morning, right after boiling eggs and leafing through the latest HOA email blast, which ironically was a call for community solidarity. In times of need, the eggs were still warm when I dispatched the lawsuit package, 47 pages neatly bound and hand-delivered to their lawyer's office by Lan herself, because she thought it would be poetic the countersuit against not only the HOA, but against Karen herself and 3 board members and their contracted maintenance supervisor. The charges: environmental negligence, willful contamination of a shared water source, retaliatory enforcement of HOA regulations, and invasion of easement contracts. Oh, and for good measure, defamation of reputation. We brought the whole book against them and threw in some bespoke chapters. I knew they'd fight dirty. Karen doesn't back down from a fight. She turns it into a brunch meeting and invites every bored housewife within a 2-mile radius. But what she didn't understand is that while she was weaponizing HOA newsletters and group chats, I was creating a war chest of evidence. I had everything: lab-certified water reports, aerial drone footage, showing the brown stream from rear of HOA maintenance building into lake charges to former maintenance contractors with stale invoices and notarized affidavit indicating they'd both resigned over unethical waste management practices. One left a written note on his exit: "This crap's not going to get buried forever." Literally, I believe he was right. We sued in county court, and within 48 hours, the hearing date was set. Karen's lawyer tried to table it because of ongoing mediation, but the judge would not hear it, especially not after he read the county water board complaint I was caught up in evidence. It turns out I wasn't alone. Catching brown material in blue water. The neighborhood blew up the moment the suit hit the docket. It became public record, and once it became public record, it became gossip. Real juicy, HOA is a syndicate-level gossip overnight. These same neighbors who'd been boycotting me like leprosy were showing up at my front door with Costco muffins. And nervously smiling, one even showed up with a used binder full of board meeting minutes from 2014 to 2018. She'd left behind after a while, as HOA secretary within were minutes of several meetings. Karen and 2 fellow board members had debated cost-cutting options for waste treatment and city disposal fee options. Their solution: divert stormwater. Runoff to low-flow retention ponds translation. My lake, but the crown jewel. The aspect that brought the case from solid to bulletproof was something someone I hadn't spoken with in more a year ago. His name was Barry Coulson, a red-faced, bald former county infrastructure coordinator with a bum knee and an attitude the size of a backhoe. I had helped Barry once years. And years ago, when his property line was being pushed in by a sleazy developer, gave him a copy of a land use map that he didn't even know he had and never asked anything back. As far as I know, apparently he recalled because he called me the week prior to trial and inquired, "You still fighting that HOA?" "Yep," I replied, stronger than ever. "You have a minute to discuss drainage?" Barry came over to my residence the next day with a USB drive and a manila envelope full of classified information, including one stamped 2019, which laid out the location of unauthorized diversion lines over maintenance parcel 3B, which conveniently coincided to supply directly into the hose. I'd found out at the rear of their shed. In other words, they didn't dump sewage out, but built an apparatus to hide it as runoff, but avoid city inspection waste. Barry even had satellite images with the installation laborers secretly toiling, disguising themselves as irrigation work. The trial itself commenced on a Wednesday morning early with a courtroom so crowded you'd think someone was offering away land. Karen sat up front, all dressed up like a director of funerals, with 3 lawyers in tow behind her, who appeared to grow like the minute it took her. She was taut, like a drum mask on my face I thought would shatter. I sat quietly behind mine own table, Lan beside me, sipping from a cup that said, "My lawyer can beat up your lawyer." Day 1 was all bluster. Her side asserting the water issues were routine maintenance, and I was doing so in bad faith to destabilize their community. Their self-styled expert, a smarmy hydrologist who clearly hadn't laid eyes on a well since college, testified that microscale nutrient input would have created lake bloom, not necessarily sewage. Luan let him keep talking, then handed him a photo from my drone video of a stream of brown liquid out of a pipe marked OA maintenance only. He stuttered, looked down at his shoes, and asked for a recess on the 3rd day. The winds shifted, in public opinion press came, someone live tweeted the events. The HOA attorneys tried to drown us out in procedural objection, but Lan cut them down like a combine through corn. When Karen mounted onto the witness stand, she was a victim witness describing how I had misused a position of trust, withholding water from the community. "Were you aware," Luann asked, "that the well your community relies on was never transferred into HOA ownership?" "I thought it was public works," Karen described, her voice shaking. "Disbelief isn't ownership." Lan spoke in plain language, told me flat. "Did you get that deed in writing? I had our attorney check into it." "Do you have that in writing?" No, the atmosphere was somber, but the coup de grace came when Barry stood up from the witness stand. He spoke it in matter-of-fact blue-collar language. They put pipes in illegally to take crap out where it shouldn't have been. Didn't tell the county and hoped no one would be the wiser. I caught on wise and now you're all seeing the jury? Satagog, Karen's lawyer, tried to object, but was overruled by the judge so quickly that it seared the bench. The verdict was quicker than people had expected. The court held the HOA responsible for violating environment safety codes, breaking their contract of use, and slander. Against me, a notice of eviction. Karen herself received fined for horrid behavior and negligence. The board had to pay over $300,000 in damages and attorney fees, and the court issued a preliminary injunction on all HOA activities until a new election was conducted. You'd think it would be over, that Karen would just slink away with her tail between legs. But no, she went PR meltdown full bore. 2 days after the verdict, a local news crew showed up outside the community center to interview outraged residents about the water debacle. Karen pulled out the camera surprisingly live and gave what was arguably the wackiest interview I have ever seen. She started out blaming the court of bias, then progressed to attributing leaky waste capacities in soil as not having the capability of absorption, and then hold your breath, actually admitted to redirecting temporary overflow briefly through the retention system as an attempt at weeding out unnecessary spending. The reporter blinked. "Are you referring to the HOA consciously channeled sewage?" Karen blinked back. She knew what she had said and attempted to spin it. Not sewage, but a gray water. Reclaimed water, untreated, was natural. Runoff commingled with operational backflow, so raw sewage. That term is subjective. It went live twice, and then became viral. Karen concedes HOA dumped poo water to cut costs. That was the headline title. The thumbnail picture was her mouth open and bulging eyes like a raccoon under the light. The comments area was biblical within the time frame. Of 1 week's time she'd resigned, The rest of the board continued looking over the shoulder of the HOA's bank account. Frozen pending audit community meetings became town hall rebellions. And me, I sat in silence, just watched it all come apart off my back porch with bourbon and the quietest silence I ever knew. No more trucks, no more artificial transgressions, just the hum of my lake booting up and my phone vibrating with texts from neighbors who had formerly taunted me, now inviting me to stand for HOA president. I did not reply. I had better ones. Karen would have really hated, but first I had one last thing to do. Cut a new sign, hammer it to the old maintenance shed, and paint the letters heavy in red. Do not dump, we're looking. And under that smaller still PS, we own the water. It all came down in a single afternoon, the kind that begins with humid stillness. The air thick with the kind of silence you only hear when something important's gonna occur. The courtroom was more packed than a feedlot on delivery day. Every folding chair occupied by someone sitting in it. Holding their breath, they'd been watching this wreck occur for weeks. The same way that you watch a wreck of a train from a distance, lines of tracks that you can't help but look at secretly. Glad it's not you in the wreckage. But today, it was Karen and her wreckage. The voice of the judge was stern as he read the verdict, but his words struck like thunder. The HOA was held liable for environmental violations, breach of contract, defamation, and negligence. The board was commanded to pay me $3,670 in damages plus $80 in legal fees, and a full audit by a state investigator out of the court's jurisdiction. But the highlight that made my day truly sparkle was the court ruling that the well in perpetuity is mine, personally alone, with sole access, maintenance, and distribution control, which meant they could not have even one drop of water, not a single flush faucet or garden hose. Without my signature, you may have heard a pin drop because the gavel dropped. I didn't smile, though. I only leaned back in my chair and let the weight of it all become real. Karen was there, of course, hidden away in the corner next to her new legal counsel, eyes open with tightly clenched hands, so tight her French manicure looked like it might shatter. She didn't speak, not when the judge relinquished her authority, not when the court clerk announced the environmental A's upright charges, and not when a uniformed police officer delivered her a subpoena live on television fraud, illegal dumping, falsified maintenance records. The list continued like the credits to an incredibly bad movie. The woman who had once fined me for asymmetrical hedge symmetry now stood accused of a crime for dumping feces into a public water source. Ironic, ain't it? The tale blew up local, regional. Even a national newspaper covered it. Oh, a president dumped sewage, got dumped herself. My favorite headline came from a local satirical page. Karen fined $300 for finding guy who owned water. Even cut short the 6 o'clock news. The anchor had sipped bottled water while he read the verdict and tried to stifle a smirk. A week later, Karen's house had a for sale sign on it and a sticker on the door with a state seal under investigation. Do not enter, nobody waved goodbye, nobody brought muffins, just a city parade, performed a hazmat check and a U-Haul, driven by what seemed to be her last living surviving cousin, peeling rubber faster than a runaway kid. The rest of the board members quit in a panic. Some said they didn't know what was going on. One guy named Jim, I think his name was, even said he just joined them. The free donut promotion did not work. Their names were listed on the forms, and the forms weren't hungry enough for donuts. A special election had to be conducted to elect in place of the board for the first time in 10 years. All seats were vacant. I did not run, didn't have to the individuals that used to taunt me. Walking down the street now nodded by. By Pi, one of the neighbors, a fellow who'd shouted at me once for using my garden hose to soak his tulips, brought by hand an apology note and a six-pack. Interesting how quickly power relationships reverse. When the truth comes out at the first community meeting of the new board, the mood was different. No high and mighty air, no lectures on where to place mailboxes or dicta about patriotic bunting. Just people trying to pick up the pieces, recreate what had been lost, and figure out how to exist together without someone threatening to garnish their wages over a lawn. No, they just wanted me to make a couple of comments during the meeting. I kept them brief, turns out. I said, when you find the guy who controls the faucet, you better pray he's feeling generous. Got a standing ovation. I only added a new proviso to the water contract. Not a fee hike, not a limit, but a tiny add-on. Any effort to evade or nullify the right of the owner of the well shall result in instantaneous cutoff of service. They called it the Karen Clause, passed it unanimously. Never charged anybody any money for water, never even planned to. I just wanted to make them realize which pipe they were drinking from. As a touch, I installed a new plaque by the lake, big bronze, and bolted to a pedestal of stone. I carved myself took me 2 days and a hell of a bakasha, but was worth every minute. The writing said, "This is what happens when you find the guy who owns your faucet." Underneath it, I added a second line in memory of clean water common sense and the previous HOA president of Willow Ridge. The lake was cleaned out by fall. Fish returned, the algae bloom ended. I had Doug retest the water just for peace of mind, and he sent it to me with one comment cleaner than bottled. "You should sell this trash." I laughed. "Nah, leave it free. Just not forgotten that winter." I poured a new layer of concrete down alongside the old maintenance building, where the outlaw pipe used to drain its waste like some kind of unholy sewage chute. I plugged up the pipe, duct taped the connection, and nailed a big iron sign over it with "No dumping ever." Underneath, "We drink this. Remember, tourists began photographing in spring." Some students from the local college even requested to conduct a case study on grassroots environmental justice. I informed them it wasn't grassroots. It was simply old-fashioned revenge, rural style, with a twist of legal paperwork and a heavy pour of patience. Life settled down. The gossip died. Grass came back where Karen let her dog just far enough onto my land to make a point. She's probably doing the same thing in some impoverished Arizona subdivision, by now trying to get someone in trouble for having their flower boxes against the community sensibility. But here in Willow Ridge, we remember 1 year to the day after the trial. I threw a lakefront barbecue. All free drinks, live music. The whole works. People brought their families, their dogs, even a couple paddle boards. We grilled burgers, frosted to fresh water, christened the brand new rebuilt community dock with champagne and a plaque that simply read bluntly, "The water's fine." I stood on the railing of the dock as the sun set low, casting gold out over the water now, crystal clear all the way across from bank to bank. I'd taken off my boots, my dog sat next to me and held a steaming mug of coffee in my other hand. No meeting, no sin, no disruption, except a soft rustling of wind through cattails and the soothing lapping at the edge. That's when I noticed the sign, my favorite one, still standing tall at the hill above pump house bolt heads. Glinting in amber light, "Private supply trespassers will be built." The faucet stayed mine, and so did the piece.